since 2006. So let's do a little bit of discussion about comparing the old DR-Z to the new. First, let's talk a little bit about the old DR-Z and some things that I like a little bit better about it compared to the new DR-Z. So I like the turn signal switch on the old DR-Z better. It's kind of a pyramid shaped switch with a little push button in the middle to deactivate the turn signal. So most new bikes have just a slider switch, and then you press the middle of the slider switch to deactivate the turn signal. Well, what I'm finding is that on the DR-Z4S is that if you kind of press that switch at a little bit of an angle in the center, it doesn't always deactivate. So sometimes I just end up sliding the switch the opposite direction to turn my turn signal off. So the old DR-Z, the turn signal deactivation is a lot easier to manipulate and get it to do what you want it to do. Let's see, another thing, one aspect of the instrumentation on the old DR-Z I like better than the DR-Z4S is that on trip A and trip B, you can switch it to the mode where you would reset to 0, but you also have the ability to press a plus and a minus button and increase or decrease the mileage. So that works really good for my intended purpose of why I'm riding the old bike today. I'm pre-running the route for the 2026 Dirty Face Dual Sport event. So I'm doing that for two reasons on the old bike. One, because I can dial the mileage forward or back if I miss a turn and need to go back to a given spot on the roll chart. Roll chart's right there. And because I have created this roll chart on this bike, I want to pre-run it, verify the roll chart with the same bike, because mileages, odometers and whatnot can vary slightly from one bike to the other, especially when you factor in tire size and tire wear, which changes the diameter and of course changes your speed reading, which then in turn affects the odometer reading for accuracy. What else can I say about my likes on this bike? It's carbureted, so it's a lot simpler. Carbureted bikes are a lot easier to work on. You can change the fueling a lot easier than having to spend a bunch of money on a programmer or ECU tuner, which at this point is not available for the DR-Z4S yet. I believe that Two Wheel Dyno Works in Washington State got their hands on a DR-Z4S to do some tuning on it. Got a sharp turn coming up here. Sharp turn, loose, rutted, full of rocks. It's always a nuisance. You can see I'm still just tractoring along there in that corner. Another thing I like about the old DR-Z is it uses 7/8 inch handlebars. Why I like 7/8, there's only one aspect of them that might be of benefit, is that you've got this crossbar, and that's there to strengthen the bars since they're smaller diameter and smaller wall tubing. So the reason I like the crossbar, as you can see here, I have my roll chart holder mounted to that. On the other side, I have my GPS mount mounted to it. Now I can get this roll chart holder on the fat bars, the 1 1/8 inch diameter bars on my DR-Z4S, but it sits right here at the bend, which you can't see below the roll chart holder. So that ends up putting the roll chart holder at a downward angle. So it does make it just a little bit a different scenario as far as trying to read it. I've got an IMS 3.2 gallon tank on this bike. I like that because it gives me extended fuel range. There is no aftermarket tank options available for the DR-Z4S or SM because it's still too new of a bike to have gotten a development process started. I do know that IMS is going to develop a tank for the DR-Z4S. At least that's their plan. I was in communication with them not too terribly long after the DR-Z4S and SM was announced, and they said as soon as they can get their hands on a bike, they will start developing a tank. The tank on this bike sits over a center backbone. It's super easy to remove the tank to route wiring for all of my accessories. I have a set of grip heaters, that's what this little switch is for right there, and then I have GPS wiring, and I also have a 12 volt USB power, or a 12 volt powered USB outlet tucked right up here next to my indicator lights. It's tough to see it because it's right above the ignition switch, and I'm using a Tusk from Rocky Mountain accessory dash switch panel that gave me spots to mount switches and ignition switch relocation bracket or location, whatever, and also the spot to mount the USB or 12 volt power outlet. Another thing that's super easy to do on the old DR-Z is remove the clutch safety interlock switch. It is actually a plug and play unit behind the headlight. You simply unplug 2 wires and then remove that switch from the clutch perch. That was one of the first things I did to this bike. I don't know how involved it's going to be to do that, or if it really is even necessary to do that on the DR-Z4S. So far, it hasn't impeded my usage of the bike. So I have just left it in place. I do think that it functions just a little bit differently on the 4S than the 400S. Another thing that some people may like, especially the SM crowd on the old bike versus the new 4SM, is that the 400S and 400SM have a helmet lock that's mounted to a little tab that's welded onto the subframe on the left side of the bike just forward of the turn signal. The 4S does not have a helmet lock. Also, the 4S does not have a steering lock like the 400S and SM do. So I don't know why that was deleted. Maybe Suzuki just saw that there was really no need for it, but it does add a little bit of security for your bike if you park it outside on a regular basis. Like, say, if you were using it to commute to work, you could lock the steering lock and it would make it a little bit more difficult for somebody to cart the bike off. At least they couldn't roll it away very easily. I don't ever park my bike outside except on very rare occasions when I'm camping. Most of the time I don't, so the steering lock has never been of any use to me, nor has a helmet lock. I've actually had to replace the subframe on this DR-Z400, and the subframe that I bought, I got it from a parted out bike on eBay, and the previous owner had removed the helmet lock and actually hacked off the mounting tab for the helmet lock. DR-Z400 has a little bit more in the way of a toolkit. The DR-Z400 had a little fender bag mounted just forward of the taillight on the top of the rear fender, and that's where the toolkit was. I've heard people say that they really would like to have had that tool kit and tool bag, tool pouch, whatever, on their new DR-Z4S. I saw no need for that because it would just get in the way of being able to mount a luggage rack. The DR-Z4S has a 3-piece toolkit. It's hard to even justify calling it a toolkit because it's only 3 pieces. One piece, which is the screwdriver handle, is under the seat, mounted to the top of the airbox, or kind of right next to the ECM under the seat. On the side panel, the left side panel, the portion that you remove with your ignition switch, behind that there's a little holder for the actual screwdriver piece, the bit that slides into the handle. And then you also have a socket wrench, a double-ended socket wrench. I believe it's 8mm and 10mm. And then there's a hole drilled through each end of it, and you stick the screwdriver handle in there as your method of being able to use that socket wrench. So another thing that I like about the DR-Z400 compared to the S is the oil fill is off to the side of the frame. It makes it easier to get a funnel in there to fill your oil when you do an oil change. On the 4S, because it has a double twin spar frame, the oil fill has been relocated right to the center, forward of the tank and below the triple clamp. And I had a heck of a time finding a funnel that would work in that, in my collection of funnels. You just basically need a long, skinny neck funnel to fit down in there. Another thing I like about the 400 is the fact that this oil fill is located off to the side means that you're not blocking access to anything when you put a Scott steering damper like I've got here. So on the 4S, with the oil fill, dipstick, and everything being top dead center, it's going to probably prevent the ability of installing a stabilizer under bar mount like I have here. I like the stabilizer under bar because that mounting system also raised my bars just a little bit, which made a better riding position for me when I'm standing up. This doesn't really apply to all models of the 400, but earlier models it does. The bike is a lot more visible with a brightly colored headlight shroud. It's sort of a non-issue because I have this great big dark blue pouch mounted to my headlight shroud. But the earlier model DR-Zs either had a white or a yellow headlight shroud. In later years, when there was a black DR-Z400 and a gray one available, then they became somewhat less visible from a distance. The big headlight on the 400 makes the bike a lot more visible too than the little pencil beam spotlight LED headlight on the 4S. One of the things that I plan to do to my 4S is to switch out the gray headlight shroud, because I've got the gray DR-Z4S. I want to switch that out to the white headlight shroud that comes on the yellow 4S. That upgrade won't be cheap. It's going to cost about $80 for an OEM headlight shroud. One more thing I just thought of. I don't really like the black rims on the 4S for the same reason I don't like them on my KTM 450, is that the black finish can scratch and get dinged up with rocks and whatnot. And then it becomes an eyesore if you're into seeing that kind of thing. On the 400, the wheels have, as far as I know, they've always been just bare aluminum, silver, with no finish other than maybe anodized finish or clear coat finish of some sort. I don't know. But when they get scratched, you don't see the scratches unless you look really close. Wow, I forgot how, yawning already again. Forgot how steep this hill is. Down Moe Ridge towards Ardmore. One other item I just remembered too. I like the gearing on the 400 versus the 4S. The 4S has 1543 gearing, and the 400 has 1544. So I rode my 4S 3 different days in this area, running the same kind of terrain, and in a lot of situations just running around on Forest Service roads or on some wide single track, I found myself either shifting back and forth between second and third a lot, or third and fourth. So what I'm getting at is that in a lot of cases, second gear was too low of a gear for the situation I was in, so I would switch to third. But then third was almost too high, so I couldn't really lug the engine when I needed to slow down a little bit. And then the same thing kept happening with third and fourth. After about halfway through the second day, or maybe sooner than that, I realized, well, this is just going to require too much shifting. So I just sacrificed, and I would leave it in the lower gear. So a couple months ago, in my collection of stuff, I found a 44 tooth rear sprocket that I forgot that I had. And the sprockets, the rear sprockets, are interchangeable between the 400 and the 4S. So after that trip was over, I switched out to the 44 tooth rear sprocket and then rode the bike, let's see, 2 different days at the Touratech rally here in Washington State. And it was spot on. It was perfect. So switching back to DR-Z400 style gearing on the 4S made the bike a little bit more enjoyable and rideable. The usability was better. The old school square mirrors on the 400 are in a way a bit better, not necessarily for off-road riding, but for street riding because they are a little bit bigger and they're taller. Some people will say, those mirrors are old school. Well, that they are. I've never ridden my 400 with those big mirrors, but for some situations or some riding scenarios, people might like those old school square mirrors on the 400 as opposed to the trapezoidal triangular shaped mirrors on the 4S. It's not even 9 or 10 o'clock yet and it's getting toasty already. Yeah, it's definitely a little more smoke in the air. It's likely from the Pomus fire, which is out that direction, way up in the wilderness area above Lake Chelan. You know, I think that pretty much wraps up all the things I like about the 400 as opposed to the 4S. So now let's move on to the things I like about the 4S as opposed to the 400. So for off-road riding, the mirrors on the 4SM and the 4S look a little bit sleeker. They're a little bit more compact. They fit the lines of the bike better, and they're just the thing of the 21st century, the thing of this era. A lot of bikes have that style shape to the mirrors. Anybody that does serious off-road riding will initially ditch those mirrors, because when you drop the bike, that rigid aluminum stem can easily snap off your mirror arm right in the clutch perch. And look what happened here. It wasn't the mirror that snapped off. I was trying to remove the ram ball. It was all deformed and oblong shaped, and I guess I had it in there so tight that when I tried to loosen it last night, it just snapped off. So I'm running a single double take mirror. In some ways I like the instrumentation better on the 4S, because all of your indicator lights are integrated into the instrumentation panel. I like the fact that it's tilted just a little bit more towards me, so it's in some ways a little bit easier to read depending on the angle of the sun. All of the buttons to control it are on the handlebars, with the exception of the ABS and setting the clock. It's got instantaneous fuel mileage readout. It also has average fuel mileage separate for trip A and trip B. Those will reset when you reset the trip meter. The thing I don't like about that instrument cluster is that it's LCD, which means when it gets covered with dust, it is impossible to read. One improvement Suzuki should make down the road to the 4S and SM is give it a color TFT display, because in bright sunlight, when it's covered with dust, it would still be totally readable. I do like that Suzuki kept trip A and trip B. I do like that Suzuki now offers a plug-and-play 12-volt power accessory port. It would be nice to see an option of a USB power port instead of 12 volt, but I'm okay with the 12 volt power port. Foot pegs, I mentioned this in one of my earlier videos where I looked at the foot pegs on the new 4S versus the 400, and I have IMS foot pegs on my DR-Z. The stock foot pegs on the old DR-Zs were really narrow, and that was the first thing that a lot of people would do that did any serious off-road riding, would switch out. they would upgrade to wider foot pegs. Back in the day, IMS was the standard for wide foot pegs. I honestly, to me, I think they still are. I don't really have too much of a liking for the aluminum style foot pegs with all those little screw-in Allen head inserts. Those can tear up the sole of your boot. I've seen it happen. Anyway, so comparing the foot pegs that I have on my 400, the IMS foot pegs, to the stock foot pegs on the 4S, they're within 1/8 of an inch of width of each other, forward to back measurement. So I so far see no reason to switch out those foot pegs. I've got 5 days of off-road riding in with the bike so far, and those foot pegs have been totally fine after I removed the rubber inserts. So that's an expense that I don't see the need to engage in. The exhaust mounting is the same. How it is integrated into mounting points on the subframe and also encompasses the passenger foot peg. Although I don't like the fact that Suzuki changed the spacing on those holes or mounting points for on the rear subframe where the foot peg bolts to. So the little foot peg delete adapter for the 400 won't work on the 4S. Same thing with racks. The rear rack on the subframe, there's a cross member below the fender with mounting points for a rack. The spacing between those 2 points changed. The spacing and configuration, or I should say that the location of the seat mounting bolts is another spot that changed in relation to the old DR-Z. It looks to be the same when you look at it at first glance, but I think it's the shape of the subframe, the contour of the rear fender and whatnot, and maybe the width. I'm not real sure on that. Stuff changed back there where the racks from the old school DR-Z won't fit the new DR-Z4S and SM. So that's kind of a bummer. I like that the rear brake master cylinder is a reservoir is all metal. Your old school DR-Z, the reservoir was plastic, and that plastic was prone to deforming and kind of spreading out at the top so that it possibly may not seal very well at the lid. This bike did that. And I think I'm still fighting issues with the rear brake master cylinder not being bled properly. I like the upside down forks on the DR-Z4S. Don't know why Suzuki never switched to that years ago on the 400. I like the push to start button on the new DR-Z4S and SM. On the earlier model DR-Zs, I think prior to 2006, the switch pod looked just like this on the right side. And it was identical on the DR-350 to this. And that button, the starter button, is prone to breaking the circuit board and whatnot behind it. So it's designed in such a way that there wasn't a whole lot of support to that circuit board. So if a person thinks that they're making a better effort of just trying to start the bike by mashing the button really hard, you could actually break one of the little tabs off of that circuit board, and then everything would sort of depress back there further into the housing, and then you would have the inability to start the bike because the button wouldn't make contact with the circuit board. There's a great big contact on the button and also a big contact on the circuit board. And the other thing too is a drawback of that design is that those contacts can get carboned up after a while, and every few years I have to take that housing apart and take a pencil eraser, clean up the carbon off of those two contacts, so I get a better actuation of the starter button. And the bike is at the point where I need to do that again. If your DR-Z400 with this style starter button ever gets to the point where it doesn't always make contact unless you sort of rock the button side to side a little bit, that's exactly why, is those contacts have gotten carboned up. So the push to start button and kill switch is all integrated into one switch. Middle is run, up, push the top, up is kill, down, just momentary push to start. That's a really neat design. We are almost to the Ardmore store. Unfortunately, I'm here so early in the day that the store isn't even open yet. They don't open till 11. Yeah, it didn't used to be like this. Well, Mr. Deer. Crossing the road. And be sure to hit the like button, drop any comments or questions down below, and then if you want to see some more DR-Z4S or 400S content, stay tuned because I've got a lot more videos coming out.